My name is Mrs. Natalie Watson, and I'm 29 years old. I live in a small apartment with my husband. We've been married for 3 years and generally get along well. However, over the past few years, I've started feeling unhappy, not just with my husband but also with his parents. He has a close relationship with them, and we visit their house about once a week. At first, I thought it was nice how much he cared about his parents. But soon, every time I went to their house, they would ask, "Natalie, when are you going to quit your job? A woman's job is to take care of the home." Gradually, I started disliking these visits. I really enjoy my job and want to keep working as long as I can. I had already told my husband this before we got married. Yet, whenever his parents made these comments, he wouldn't say a word or even look at me, as if it didn't concern him. Eventually, I began dreading going to his parents' house. Sometimes, I would suggest to my husband, "Why don't you go alone?" But he'd always insist, "My parents want to see you too," and he'd make me go with him. Eventually, I stopped trying to argue. I didn't want to bring up how his parents' words bothered me, since it might hurt his feelings. So each time, I just smiled and ignored their comments. What bothered me most, though, was when they'd ask, "Why don't you have a child yet?" I like kids and would love to have one, but it's not something that can happen instantly just because we want it. I didn't understand why they expected us to have a child just for their sake, and honestly, I wished they would leave me alone. I talked to my husband about it, but he just brushed it off, saying, "Don't worry about it. You're just overthinking." As my frustration built up because of his lack of support, my mother-in-law said something I couldn't ignore. She asked, "Are you infertile? Is that why you haven't had a child?" My father-in-law also looked at me like I'd done something wrong and asked, "Did you hide your infertility and marry our son?" I couldn't hold back any longer. I'd always managed to smile through their comments, but this time I finally replied, "I'll go through infertility treatment if that's what you want. But in return, can you promise never to bring this up again?" I was surprised at my own words, realizing how much stress I'd been holding in. Then, for the first time, my husband finally spoke up. My husband told his parents firmly, "I don't think we need fertility treatments. We're still young, and there's no need to rush. Fertility treatments are expensive, and I want us to enjoy our time as a couple." At the time, I took his words to mean that he was thinking about me and how I felt. One weekday, I took a day off work and went to see a gynecologist. Although my husband's parents had been nagging us less about having a child, I still wanted to know for sure if I had any fertility issues. I thought about discussing it with my husband, but he always got moody whenever I mentioned fertility treatments. So, I decided to go for the checkup on my own. The exam was faster than I expected, and I scheduled a follow-up appointment for the results the next week. As I was leaving, I made eye contact with a pregnant woman in the waiting room. I recognized her face immediately. It was Clara, my classmate from elementary and middle school. She recognized me, too, and came over to say hello. Clara was 9 months pregnant, and her belly was big. Since she'd just had her checkup, I decided to walk her home. I found out her house was close to mine, and I was even more surprised to learn that her husband worked at the same company as mine. As we caught up on our lives and shared memories, my eyes kept drifting to her belly. Noticing, Clara asked, "Do you want to touch it? Is it okay?" I asked, and she replied, "Of course." I gently touched her belly, remembering how slim and fit Clara used to be. Now her body was so different, and I was amazed by the thought of a baby growing inside her. As I held my hand there, I suddenly felt a slight movement. I looked up, surprised. "Did it just?" "Yeah," she said with a smile. "It started moving recently." "That's amazing." "Yeah," she agreed. As Clara happily stroked her belly, she looked like a true mother. Without thinking, I said, "I'm envious," but then I realized it might have sounded inappropriate, so I quickly looked away. Clara, being sensitive to emotions, noticed my reaction and asked, "Did I misunderstand something?" "I'm sorry, but did something happen?" I hesitated but knew I couldn't hide my feelings from Clara. So, I told her about my in-laws and their pressure about having children. Once I started talking, I couldn't stop. I ended up sharing everything, even about the fertility test I took that day. I worried I might have said too much, but the stress I had been feeling made it feel okay to share. I think I just needed someone to listen to my frustrations from the past few years. While I spoke, Clara just nodded and listened quietly. After I finished, she said, "You've been holding back for so long. You've handled it well." If it were me, I don't think I could have held back and would have cut ties with my in-laws. I nodded, realizing how stressed I had been. "I feel a bit relieved after talking to you, Clara. At least my husband stands by my side, which is a small comfort." I said this with a light laugh, but Clara looked tense. Confused by her expression, I called her name. After a moment of hesitation, she spoke up. "It's about your husband. You might want to keep the test results to yourself for now." I blinked, surprised by her words. "Why do you say that?" I asked her directly. Then Clara shared something shocking that I couldn't fully understand. I somehow made it home, feeling unsteady as I walked. Once home, I sat on the sofa, thinking about what Clara had said. I didn't want to believe it, but I also couldn't imagine her lying. I had been feeling uneasy about my husband's behavior lately. If what Clara said was true, I couldn't forgive him. I made up my mind to find out the truth. My husband and I were visiting my in-laws after a long time. While my husband and his parents were having tea and snacks, my mother-in-law suddenly asked, "So, when will you quit your job, Natalie?" Before, I would have said, "I don't have plans to quit yet," but this time I replied, "I suppose I'll quit when we have a child." My mother-in-law blinked and said, "Well, you've finally decided to have a child." My father-in-law excitedly added, "Oh, will I finally get to hold a grandchild?" But my husband, after glancing at me, made a face that said, "Don't say unnecessary things." He then said, "Having a child is a blessing, but we don't know if it will happen right away." As I expected, my husband reacted just like I thought he would. I glanced at my husband and said, "Actually, I went to the gynecologist the other day and got my infertility test results. It says there are no issues." Before he could respond, I continued, "I'm starting to want a child too. You'll cooperate for your parents' sake, right?" He looked between the test results and my face, then turned bright red and yelled, "I'm not taking any infertility treatments. I won't get tested either." His parents were shocked by his sudden outburst, and I felt disappointed because I realized Clara had been right. "Hey, do you know Mr. Howard?" I asked. He looked surprised and wondered how I knew. I decided to explain while waiting for his response. "His wife is my friend. Apparently, you've been saying things at work like, 'My wife is a defective product who can't have children because of infertility. She has abandoned being a woman and only focuses on work. I'm so pitiful to have married her.'" I looked at him with a cold stare, something I had never done before. His mouth trembled, and he got defensive. "So what if it's true? Who else would want someone like you?" Watching my furious husband, I felt my feelings for him starting to fade. I wondered what I ever saw in him. Calmly, I pointed to the test results on the table and said, "I just proved there's no problem with me, right?" He stayed silent, so I brought up something that had been bothering me. "Could it be that you're the one with issues? Is that why you've been refusing infertility treatments and testing?" At that moment, my mother-in-law, who had been quiet, spoke up. "There's no way that's true. If there's a problem, it's with you." Her face turned red as she grabbed the test results and tore them up. My husband seemed surprised by his mother's actions, but then agreed, "Yeah, that's right. There's no way I have a problem." They both started blaming me. Realizing that continuing the conversation was pointless, I slammed the prepared divorce papers on the table and said, "Then please divorce me. Why don't you find a much better wife than someone like me?" He replied, "Yeah, I'll find a much better wife than you," angrily, as he filled out the divorce papers. His parents didn't try to stop him. I emotionlessly watched them fill out the papers, feeling joy at the thought of severing ties with them. Once he finished, I quickly snatched the papers and said, "Well then, goodbye," as I hurried out of my in-laws' house. I thought I heard someone call out behind me, but I ignored it and headed straight to City Hall to submit the divorce papers. A few days later, I quickly moved out of the apartment we had shared and into my company dormitory. Since I was the only one on the lease and had already prepared for this day, the move went smoothly. I packed up my husband's belongings in cardboard boxes and sent them to his parents' house with cash on delivery. Once I got used to life in the company dormitory, I received a call from my ex-husband. I wondered what he wanted now, so I answered, but he yelled right away, "Why did you submit the divorce papers? Why don't you move out of the apartment?" I wanted to ask why he was bringing this up now. I calmly explained, "Don't say things that don't make sense. You agreed to the divorce and filled out the papers. I signed the lease for the apartment, so since we're divorced, I moved out. It's no longer necessary." But my ex-husband didn't listen. He kept insisting, "Take back the divorce. No, let's go submit new marriage papers. Where are you living now? Let's live together again." I couldn't take it anymore, so I said, "Okay, I'm hanging up now. Don't ever call me again." I tried to end the call, but he threatened, "If you don't tell me where you're living, I'll go to your company." I was fed up and told him, "You'll be the one in trouble if you cause any problems," and hung up. Still, I worried he might actually come to my company, so I talked to my boss about my ex-husband just in case. Neither my boss nor I thought he would actually do anything, but then he caused a scene. The security guard told me he went wild in the company lobby, and the police had to be called. I felt ashamed and guilty, but my coworker sympathized with me and said breaking up with him was the right choice. Later, I heard from Clara's husband that my ex-husband panicked when the police incident became known at his company and tried to make me the villain. However, Clara's husband corrected the story, and the lies my ex-husband told about me were exposed. It turned out he found it hard to stay at the company and ended up quitting. Most likely, my unemployed ex-husband was back at his parents' house, crying to them. Honestly, even though it might sound cruel, I thought it must be tough for his parents to support a son who was now both unemployed and divorced. But that didn't really matter to me anymore, since he was a stranger now. Since then, I've been free from unnecessary stress and focusing on work. I have more time and money to spend freely. I occasionally visit Clara to check on her, and we make plans to spoil her baby. She sometimes finds it amusing and shakes her head at me. As for getting remarried, I'm not thinking about that just yet. But I do hope that someday I can have a happy family of my own.
It became apparent that Charles's employee, Junior, had been openly undermining his leadership, going so far as to dismiss Charles as a competent boss altogether. Charles overheard these disparaging remarks, which led to a tense confrontation between the two. In hindsight, Charles should have realized the importance of fostering a stronger relationship with his team. On the other hand, I received an offer to relocate to our company's overseas headquarters. Initially, I declined, weighed down by the ongoing issues and wanting to be supportive of Charles during his turbulent time. However, after much thought, I accepted the position and am now preparing for the move. My father, understandably concerned, has been adjusting to the idea, and we've started practicing video calls to stay connected once I leave. This new role has been a lifelong dream of mine, and I'm eager to pour my energy into this exciting opportunity. As for Charles, he rarely contributed to household chores, yet this never seemed to bother Angela. When they went out, Charles typically took the lead, allowing Angela to relax and enjoy herself without stress. Their relationship seemed balanced, or at least it appeared that way. Everything shifted when Angela's mother suddenly passed away. Angela was at work when her father called to inform her that her mother's condition had taken a sharp turn for the worse, and she had collapsed. Rushing to the hospital, Angela barely had time to say her goodbyes. She decided to stay with her father to help manage the funeral arrangements. When she informed Charles, he claimed he couldn't leave work on such short notice. As a result, he missed the wake and only arrived in time for the funeral. Unprepared for the occasion, Charles hadn't even dressed appropriately, and I found myself in a frantic scramble to find something suitable for him to wear. Despite my efforts, he made no effort to hide his irritation, blaming me for not having prepared his clothes in advance. The heavy emotions surrounding the funeral, along with the responsibilities that came with it, made Charles's complaints even harder to bear. I eventually decided to ignore them, hoping to avoid a confrontation, but this only seemed to worsen his mood. Since that day, our marriage has become increasingly strained, with arguments becoming more frequent. Disagreements aren't uncommon after 4 years of marriage, but Charles's behavior has grown more combative. He constantly insists on making decisions and dictating what I should do, and it's been draining. I've tried to push back a few times, but his unfamiliarity with the simplest things in our home has turned minor tasks into drawn-out frustrations, accompanied by his never-ending grumbling. As time went on, I realized it was often easier to handle things on my own. Even though Charles continues to make demands, I haven't always followed his instructions, opting instead to take care of tasks independently to keep my life running smoothly. Recently, I brought up the upcoming gathering to mark the first anniversary of my mother's passing. When I reminded Charles, his response was indifferent at best. He complained about an important meeting scheduled on the same day, questioning how he could possibly attend the memorial. His excuse was that he couldn't delegate his work, especially since his recent promotion, which he never missed a chance to flaunt to his junior staff. I was barely able to contain my frustration as I tried to convey how important the memorial was to me. It was painfully clear that he prioritized his new title and responsibilities, often leaving me to manage everything on my own. No matter how much I urged him to focus on our family's needs, his work always seemed to come first. Later that evening, when I finally arrived home from work, I found Charles sprawled on the couch, a beer in hand. "Sorry, I'm late. Had to stay for overtime," I explained, already sensing his annoyance that dinner had been delayed. His response was sharp. "I've been waiting here for an hour." While it had only been an hour, and knowing that cooking wasn't his strong suit, it baffled me that he hadn't thought to get something to eat in the meantime. I had told him when I'd be home. After all, trying to keep my irritation in check, I handed him a takeout box and said, "I thought cooking would take too long tonight, so I grabbed this on the way home." Charles's reaction was swift and cutting, slamming his beer glass onto the table. "Takeout again? You're really slacking off lately, aren't you?" His words stung, especially considering it had been nearly 3 weeks since we last ordered takeout. Yes, I had been busy and couldn't cook every night, but I always ensured we had balanced meals and didn't rely on processed food. His uncalled-for critique left me debating whether I should even respond. Sensing my silence as an admission of guilt, Charles pressed on, adding insult to injury. "Can't argue when it's true. Huh? You should start doing your chores properly. You've been coming home late, claiming overtime. Maybe you're just out cheating." His accusation ignited the resentment simmering inside me. "If you know I'm working late, the least you could do is make dinner," I shot back. "You don't even have to cook. Picking up takeout isn't that hard. I always tell you when I'll be home, and despite my workload, I manage all the household chores. There's no need for that attitude." His response was a sharp glare, followed by a low blow. "You're 4 years older. Remember? I could have married a younger woman, but I chose you." He spoke as though I should be grateful, like his choice of me was a favor I didn't deserve. "You should be thankful and listen to me. No one else would want you." His words were meant to belittle me, but instead, they revealed just how broken our communication and respect for each other had become. "So, if I left, you'd be in trouble, right?" My anger boiled over. "If you wanted a younger woman, you should have married one before we got together. I asked you if you were fine with my age, and you said yes. That's why we're married. But trust me, I can manage just fine without you." Charles responded with a mocking laugh. "Fine, then let's get a divorce," he said, grabbing his beer and the takeout before storming off to his room. We had fought plenty of times before, but this argument felt different, like we had crossed a line. I was tired of his constant disrespect. I sat down with my takeout, trying to calm myself. hoping maybe he was just hungry and irritable. But as I ate, the weight of our conversation hung heavily on me, especially with my mom's death anniversary just around the corner. After some time, I called out to him from outside his door. "We need to leave by 7 a.m. tomorrow, so I'll wake you up around 6 o'clock. There was no response, though I was sure he was awake. I went to bed, feeling a mix of exhaustion and unease. The next morning, I woke up early to find that Charles was already gone. The bags I had packed for us were still in the room. He hadn't left for the gathering without me. So, where had he gone? I tried calling his phone, but there was no answer. He ignored my texts too. Left with no choice, I left him a voicemail and started getting ready on my own. As I waited for the train at the station, Charles finally picked up. "I have a meeting. Can't leave it to my juniors," he said curtly before hanging up. I stood there, staring at my phone, feeling a mix of anger and resignation. I stood there, stunned and bewildered, as the train arrived. With no time to dwell on it, I boarded, struggling with the luggage meant for both of us. When I finally reached my father's house, his anxious eyes met mine as he asked, "Where's Charles?" Seeing the lingering sadness in his eyes since my mother's passing, I didn't want to add to his worries. Forcing a smile, I took a deep breath and replied, "Sorry. He got called into an important meeting. He was supposed to come." Charles's recent promotion made for a convenient excuse, and I reassured my father that his absence was work-related and important. My father nodded understandingly. "I know he's working hard. It's a shame not to see him, but your mother would have understood. Let him know he's always welcome here," he said softly. There was a hint of sadness in his words, but I kept my smile intact throughout the day, refusing to show how much it hurt. The day passed without a word from Charles, and as night settled in, I chose not to reach out either. I decided to stay the night at my father's house and return home the next day. As planned, though it felt almost childish, the thought of making Charles his favorite meal, hamburgers, crossed my mind for when I got home. The following day, I left my father's house and returned home around noon. Before heading out to the grocery store, I wanted to drop off my bags. As I walked into the living room, I immediately noticed Charles's dirty laundry scattered across the floor, a sight I was all too familiar with. With a sigh, I thought, he still hasn't learned how to use the washing machine. I tossed his clothes in with mine, and after a brief moment, headed back to the living room. That's when something caught my eye. Sitting on the table, as if left deliberately in plain view, were divorce papers, already signed by Charles. My heart sank. Was this really how he wanted to communicate that he was serious about ending our marriage? Staring at the papers in disbelief, a storm of emotions surged through me. Grabbing my phone, I hesitated for a second before calling him, unsure if he'd even pick up during his lunch break. To my surprise, he answered almost immediately. "What's the meaning of these divorce papers?" I demanded, my voice a blend of confusion and anger. Charles responded with a cold, mocking laugh. "What's there to question? It's exactly what it looks like. I don't want an older wife who won't do her chores. That's why I want a divorce. If we split, I can find a younger wife. A wife's like a status symbol, right? I can't exactly boast about you." His words hit me like a punch, reducing our years together to nothing more than a transaction, turning what I had believed to be a partnership into something shallow and superficial. Charles continued, his tone indifferent. "It's tough when my team asks about you. It's awkward avoiding the topic." I was speechless. His blunt criticism was stunning, and I found myself unable to respond. "If you don't want a divorce, then start doing your chores properly," he continued, as if this was a reasonable request. "I'll be home as usual tonight, so don't forget to grab some beer. If you disagree, take the divorce papers to court. It's up to you." With that, he hung up, leaving me reeling. my mind spinning with shock and disbelief. Charles probably assumed I'd give in to his demands, thinking that I did the housework because I was afraid of losing him or worried about appearing incompetent. Perhaps he saw himself as the dominant figure in our marriage. Some might think being married to a younger man sounds exciting, but in reality, it was far from glamorous. I had often played up his youth, but if I was honest, Charles was painfully average in looks, personality, and income. There was nothing exceptional about him. Describing him as younger had merely been convenient. When we first got married, the 4-year age gap had seemed more noticeable, but now, in our 30s, it felt trivial. It was exhausting to constantly be labeled the older wife when we were essentially the same age. Fed up with his arrogance and the hollow foundation of our marriage, I grabbed my bag and headed straight to the family court. Submitting those divorce papers felt like lifting a weight off my chest. As I walked out of the courthouse, a sense of relief washed over me. I realized then that I didn't need Charles to feel complete. With the promise of newfound freedom, I felt lighter, as though I had finally stepped out from under a cloud that had long been looming over me. This was the end of our marriage, but the beginning of a life where I could truly live on my own terms. Seizing the opportunity, I decided to take a few days off from work. Fortunately, my boss understood and granted me a week's leave, as work had slowed down. Now that I was officially divorced, it was time to get my life in order. With only a few possessions, the cleaning and packing were straightforward. I stored the larger items in a storage unit, packed the essentials and clothes into my car, and on a whim, decided to visit a hot spring resort. During the off-season, I easily found a budget-friendly hotel and set off, thrilled to start this new chapter of my life. I was savoring the peaceful atmosphere of the hot springs and enjoying the relaxation of my hotel room when my phone rang abruptly. "Angela, didn't I ask you to get beer? Where are you?" It was Charles, sounding puzzled and slightly irritated. It was around the time he usually returned home from work. I couldn't help but chuckle as I answered, "I'm at a hot spring resort." "A hot spring resort? Why? What's going on?" Charles's voice carried a mix of confusion and agitation. "Didn't you say I should file for divorce if I disagreed with you?" I reminded him, picturing his stunned expression, which made me laugh even more. "Wait, did you actually file them?" His tone shifted from bewildered to frustrated. "Yes, I did. You suggested it, Charles. Have you forgotten what you said?" I replied, still amused by his reaction. Charles's voice, now tinged with anxiety, showed his disbelief. "Wait, are you joking? When you say hot spring resort, do you mean some nearby spa? If so, I'll get dinner. Come home soon." I couldn't help but laugh at his sudden shift to a seemingly considerate tone, as if he was trying to play the caring husband. "It took me about an hour and a half to drive here. There's even an outdoor natural hot spring. It's incredibly relaxing. I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. Since you're getting dinner, I've already packed my things, so you won't have to worry about me coming back. Take care of yourself." Charles pleaded for me to return, but I had no intention of going back. "You're the one who initiated the divorce. Have you forgotten? It was clear you were using the threat of divorce to control me," I told him firmly. "I can manage without you now that you've divorced your older wife. Go ahead and find a younger one if you can. Whether you succeed or not is no longer my concern," I said firmly. Charles fell silent, clearly taken aback by my determination. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you should consider moving out of that apartment." "Why should I?" I responded calmly, though I had already considered this myself. "Think about your income. You'll end up broke if you stay there. You can't clean, do laundry, or cook. You'll need housekeeping and dining out, which costs money. It would be a problem if most of your salary goes towards rent," he reasoned. I couldn't help but smile slightly. You thought you were the provider, but my salary is nearly double yours. You never really provided for me, if anything. It was the other way around, I said, cutting to the core of the issue. Also, you were overly confident because of one junior. But did you know I manage multiple juniors and even more beneath them? I usually keep work to myself because you get moody, but I outrank you in both position and salary. You'd think you would have noticed after living together. It seemed like Charles was just now realizing this, possibly because he had kept his ego intact by looking down on me. Now that his delusion was shattered, he must have felt defeated. I had struck a blow to his pride, a kind of retribution for all these years. The reason I had handled household chores without complaint, despite his domineering attitude, was partly because he was younger and I had given him some leeway, and partly because it was too much trouble to ask him for anything. It's not like I needed you to stay with me. I was just managing your needs along with my own. So when you said, do the chores, or we divorce, of course, I chose divorce. We're strangers now. Goodbye, I said firmly before ending the call. Feeling a sense of liberation, I enjoyed a delicious meal at the hotel afterward. Charles, evidently still clinging to the idea of reconciliation, attempted to reach out again, but I was already relishing the newfound freedom and independence in my life. When he called once more, I greeted him with a knowing smile. Remember, I'm older than you. I'm sure you wouldn't want me back. It seemed that Charles's search for companionship with younger women had not been successful. Eventually, he realized his situation was not favorable and decided to move out of the apartment. To handle the division of assets, I hired a lawyer to ensure I received more than just an equitable split. I sought additional compensation to reflect the years I had managed most of the household chores. Charles, always looking to cut costs, opted against hiring legal representation, giving me a considerable advantage. With the help of my lawyer, we secured a settlement that was highly favorable to me. I was satisfied with the outcome and relieved to have resolved the matter. Meanwhile, Charles's troubles at work were only beginning. His junior team member had been openly critical of his leadership, undermining his authority by declaring he wasn't a proper boss. Charles discovered these complaints, leading to a heated argument, another clear sign of the importance of nurturing and supporting your team, something Charles had evidently neglected. In terms of my career, I had been offered a highly sought-after position at our company's overseas headquarters. Initially, I hesitated to accept due to the personal upheavals and out of consideration for Charles. However, with my personal situation evolving, I decided to embrace the opportunity wholeheartedly. I am now actively preparing for this exciting transition, though it has caused some concern for my father. We've adapted by practicing video calls to stay connected once I'm abroad. I feel content and excited about the future, ready to fully commit to this new chapter of my life. It's time to pursue the career I've always dreamed of, confident that I've made the right decisions for my future. In the busy city of Sydney, Australia, where tall buildings sparkled in the sunlight and everything moved fast, Jasmine's days felt slow. At 25, Jasmine worked hard as a cleaner but struggled to get by. Her days were filled with the noise of cleaning tools and city traffic, but she stayed hopeful despite her tough life. Each day, she cleaned offices and hotels carefully, dreaming of a better life for herself and her family. One afternoon, while Jasmine was cleaning the floors of a fancy office building in Sydney's business district, a tall, well-dressed man named Liam caught her attention. Liam, 28 and wealthy, had been walking through the building's lobby and noticed Jasmine. He was intrigued not by her looks, but by how dedicated she was to her work. He admired her focus and the kindness she showed despite her situation. Feeling sympathetic, Liam walked up to Jasmine. "Excuse me," he said, sounding genuinely concerned. "I've been watching you work, and you do a great job. Here, take this." He gave her a banknote that was more than enough to cover a day's work. Jasmine looked up, surprised and confused by the unexpected gift. "Thank you, but you really don't have to," Jasmine said, surprised. Liam smiled and shook his head. "It's the least I can do. It's a tough world, and people should help each other when they can." As he left, Jasmine held the money tightly, feeling a mix of gratitude and disbelief. It wasn't just the money that meant a lot to her, but the kindness from someone who seemed to live a life of luxury. It reminded her that compassion still exists, even among the rich. Back at his fancy mansion, Liam's stepfather, Marcus, a wealthy and calculating man in his late 50s, was noticing Liam's recent acts of charity. Marcus, who was always thinking about their family's status, saw these acts as a threat. He thought kindness might be a weakness that could harm their reputation. One evening, Marcus called Liam to his study. The room was filled with expensive art and old furniture. Marcus sat back in his chair, looking serious. "Liam, I've heard about your recent charity work," Marcus said, sounding smooth but disapproving. "You might not realize, but this could hurt our family's image. We have a reputation to maintain." Liam, used to his stepfather's controlling ways, was surprised by how serious Marcus was. "I'm just trying to help people," he said firmly. "Isn't that a good thing?" Marcus's face grew stern. "Not if it harms our reputation. You need to understand how important this is." Liam was confused but didn't have time to ask more. Marcus continued, "I think you need to learn about responsibility and image. I've set up something to help you understand." The next day, Jasmine got an unexpected visit from Marcus. He arrived at her small apartment, looking out of place among the modest surroundings. With a careful smile, he made Jasmine an offer that seemed too good to be true. "Jasmine," he began, "I'm here to offer you a chance," Marcus said. "My stepson Liam wants to help people like you, to avoid any more problems. We've come up with a plan. If you agree to marry Liam, you'll have a life of comfort and wealth." Jasmine was shocked. "Marry him? But why? I don't even know him." Marcus's smile didn't change. "It's a way to secure your future and help your community. The money you'll get could really make a difference in your life and others." Jasmine was torn. The chance to improve her life and help her family was tempting, but marrying a stranger felt wrong. Still, the possibility of making a big impact with the money made her think. As days passed, Jasmine felt overwhelmed by her conflicting emotions. She didn't realize that Marcus's offer was part of a bigger plan to manipulate and control. The real purpose of Marcus's scheme was hidden, setting the stage for future conflicts and secrets. Meanwhile, Liam's life continued to be shaped by Marcus's influence. Liam didn't know the full extent of his stepfather's plans. As the wedding day got closer, tension built up. Jasmine's choice would soon reveal a web of betrayal and deceit that neither she nor Liam could have expected. With Sydney's skyline shining in the sunlight, Jasmine found herself at a difficult decision. Marcus's proposal left her confused. Marrying a wealthy man like Liam was tempting, but the way the offer was made felt wrong. Marcus seemed more interested in controlling her than in being kind. Jasmine spent the next few days feeling overwhelmed. Trying to make sense of the situation, Jasmine was torn between a comfortable life and the moral issues of the arrangement. One evening, while cleaning a fancy restaurant in Sydney, she saw Marcus talking privately with an older woman. Jasmine noticed the woman's brooch, which seemed oddly familiar. She tried to ignore it and focused on her work, but the brooch kept coming back to her mind. The next day, Jasmine went to a local market and overheard a conversation about a wealthy estate and a woman named Evelyn Howard. The talk included a sad story of loss and betrayal. The name Howard caught her attention, and she remembered the brooch from the restaurant. Curious, she decided to look into it. Jasmine found old newspaper articles about Evelyn Howard. They described Evelyn as a kind and generous woman who was well known in Sydney's high society. After her death, her wealth had gone to her husband, Marcus. Determined to find out more, Jasmine went to the local archives. There, she found more information about Evelyn Howard's life and her tragic death. What shocked Jasmine the most was learning about a missing infant daughter who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Jasmine realized with horror that the missing child was her. As Jasmine put the pieces together, she discovered Marcus's cruel actions. He had married Evelyn, taken her wealth, and then abandoned Jasmine when Evelyn died. Marcus had deliberately erased Jasmine's existence to keep control of the family's money. This was a crushing blow, confirming her worst fears about Marcus and the true nature of his proposal. The wedding day came with a mix of excitement and fear. The fancy venue, filled with lavish decorations, was a stark contrast to Jasmine's modest background. Guests in elegant outfits buzzed with excitement, unaware of the hidden drama. Liam, not knowing the true reasons behind the marriage arrangement, was getting ready for the ceremony. Despite his doubts and the growing tension, he tried to stay positive, hoping that marrying Jasmine might lead to something good. He had come to appreciate Jasmine's strength and kindness and wished their marriage could bring about some positive change. Dressed in a beautiful wedding gown, Jasmine felt both nervous and determined as she walked down the aisle. She glanced at Marcus, whose smug look did nothing to calm her. As the ceremony began, Jasmine braced herself for the worst. She knew Marcus was planning to reveal her past to embarrass her and Liam, but she was ready to act. With newfound courage, Jasmine stepped forward and interrupted the ceremony. "Stop! I have something to say," she declared. The guests whispered in confusion as Jasmine took a deep breath. "When I was a child, Marcus abandoned me. My mother, Evelyn Howard, died years ago. Marcus took her money and left me in poverty." The room was stunned. Liam looked shocked, and Marcus's face went pale. The image Marcus had carefully built started to fall apart. Jasmine continued, her voice steady despite shaking hands. "Marcus tricked me into this marriage not out of kindness, but for his own gain. I am the rightful heir to Evelyn Howard's estate, not just a poor cleaner." The guests were stunned into silence, glancing between Jasmine and Marcus. Liam, now fully aware of Marcus's betrayal, felt a mix of anger and shock. He realized that his stepfather had set up the entire situation to satisfy his own greedy desires. Marcus's calm demeanor crumbled as he faced the truth. Jasmine's accusations and the guests' shock left him trapped. His deceit and manipulation were exposed for everyone to see. As the guests started to understand what had happened, Jasmine's strength and determination became clear. She went from being a pawn in Marcus's scheme to a symbol of truth and justice. What was supposed to be a display of Marcus's power turned into a reveal of his darkest secrets. The once fancy wedding hall was now filled with confusion and commotion. The elegant decorations seemed out of place against the drama unfolding. Guests whispered among themselves, their faces showing a mix of shock and curiosity. Liam stood frozen, trying to process the shocking news Jasmine had just shared. Marcus, who had once been confident in his power, now found himself in a crisis he couldn't control. As Jasmine's words echoed through the hall, Liam's shock turned into intense anger. He turned to Marcus, his voice quiet but full of rage. "Is it true, Marcus? Did you really abandon Jasmine and steal her mother's fortune?" Marcus, now trapped and desperate, tried to stay calm. "Liam, this is all a misunderstanding. Jasmine is trying to mess things up." Liam's anger flared. "I've seen enough. It's clear you've been deceitful from the beginning. The truth is out, and you need to explain yourself to everyone here." The guests whispered among themselves, their interest peaked. The festive mood was replaced with tension and anticipation. Jasmine stood firm, her heart racing but her determination strong. She had revealed Marcus's deceit, but the fight was far from over. Marcus's face showed panic as he tried to save his reputation. "This is a smear campaign. Jasmine is trying to deceive everyone." Before he could say more, the police arrived, called by worried guests who had seen Marcus's deceit. The officers, informed about what had happened, began to investigate. They questioned Marcus, Jasmine, and the stunned guests. With Liam by her side, Jasmine explained the truth about her past and Marcus's betrayal. She shared details about Marcus's schemes and her research into Evelyn Howard's history, which supported her claims. The police took notes and promised to look into everything carefully. As the investigation continued, it became clear that Marcus had not only manipulated the situation but had also been involved in fraud. Jasmine's evidence confirmed her identity as Evelyn Howard's daughter and showed that Marcus had falsely claimed her inheritance. The days after the wedding were chaotic. Marcus faced growing financial and legal problems. Meanwhile, Jasmine and Liam found themselves unexpectedly working together. Jasmine and Liam's shared experience and growing respect for each other turned their forced marriage into something genuine. Liam, feeling guilty for being part of Marcus's scheme, was deeply affected by Jasmine's struggles. He promised to help her seek justice. Jasmine's bravery and determination inspired many. She continued to fight for those who had been wronged and used her situation to highlight injustices. Her transformation from a struggling cleaner to a strong advocate for justice showed her courage. As the legal battles against Marcus heated up, Jasmine and Liam worked closely together. They spent long hours going through documents, meeting with lawyers, and preparing for court. Their teamwork showed their dedication to finding the truth and seeking justice. Even with the growing evidence against him, Marcus refused to give up. He kept trying to deceive and discredit Jasmine, but with increasing public support and solid legal evidence, it was becoming harder for him to maintain his false image. The turning point came when the court showed all the evidence of Marcus's crimes. It was clear he was guilty, and his attempts to hide his actions failed. The judge, impressed by Jasmine's courage and the solid proof of Marcus's wrongdoing, sentenced him to a long prison term and ordered him to return the stolen money. Jasmine and Liam's hard-fought victory was a testament to their strength and persistence. Going through this struggle had made their bond stronger. After the trial, Jasmine and Liam decided to use their experience for good. They started a foundation to help people in need, focusing on supporting and providing opportunities for those who are less fortunate. Their aim was to make a positive impact in the community and prevent others from facing similar injustices. In the courtroom, everyone was silent as the verdict was read. Marcus was sentenced to 15 years in prison for his fraud and ordered to repay the stolen money. His proud facade was shattered, and he had to face the consequences of his greed and deceit. He had underestimated Jasmine and Liam's resolve, and now he was paying the price. As Marcus was taken away in handcuffs, the media went wild with coverage. News channels all over Sydney reported on the fall of the wealthy businessman and the surprising events that led to his downfall. Jasmine and Liam found themselves in the public eye, becoming symbols of bravery and justice. Their story inspired many people. Jasmine, now recognized as the rightful owner of Evelyn Howard's estate, faced the challenge of adjusting to her new life. Going from a struggling cleaner to inheriting a large fortune was overwhelming, but she was determined to use her wealth for good. With Liam's help, she started working on the promises she had made. Liam, having seen Marcus's manipulation up close, felt a strong sense of duty. His initial act of kindness had sparked the events that led to Marcus's downfall, and he wanted to make sure their work had a lasting impact. Together with Jasmine, he set up a foundation in Sydney to support, educate, and help those in need. The foundation's goal was to assist the underprivileged and give a helping hand to those who had been forgotten by society. Jasmine and Liam put in a lot of hard work to set up programs that helped with various needs, like giving financial aid, education, and job training. They used their platform to push for social justice and draw attention to the struggles faced by underserved communities. Jasmine's story, once full of hardship and betrayal, had become a symbol of hope and change. Her bravery and determination turned her into an advocate for positive change, and her efforts were really making a difference in many people's lives. She found satisfaction in using her experiences to help others and make a real impact. Liam also discovered a new purpose. By working with the foundation, He was able to use his wealth and influence to support meaningful causes. The experience changed him from a wealthy young man who was disconnected from other struggles into someone who truly cared about making a difference. Lily Adams was the kind of person who made everyone feel comfortable. At 28, she had a warm and friendly personality that was especially helpful in her job as an orderly at a busy Seattle hospital. Growing up with her grandmother Grace, Lily learned how important kindness and understanding were. Her cheerful smile and gentle demeanor stood out in the often tough hospital environment. One chilly autumn morning, while Lily was working, she saw something odd: a sleek gray cat with bright green eyes sitting outside the hospital entrance. The cat looked out of place and watched everyone with a curious gaze. Each day, as Lily walked by, the cat was always in the same spot. Intrigued, Lily asked Sam, the elderly janitor who had been at the hospital forever, about the cat. Sam, with his weathered face and warm eyes, smiled when Lily brought it up. "Aw, that's Whiskers," Sam said, sounding a bit sad. "He belongs to an old man who used to visit the hospital every week. The man had a bad accident and is now in the ICU. Whiskers has been waiting here every day since then. I've been letting him stay in the storage shed to keep him safe, but he won't leave his spot." Lily felt sorry for the lonely cat. She understood what it was like to be alone and depend on someone. Her grandmother Grace had been her support after her parents passed away when she was young. Seeing Whiskers waiting for his owner reminded Lily of her own bond with Grace. Every day, Lily made sure to visit Whiskers during her breaks. She'd bring him food or just sit with him, giving him a kind word or a gentle pat. Over time, Whiskers began to recognize her and would brighten up when she came. Meanwhile, the hospital was always busy, and Lily's work never seemed to get any easier. Na Evans, a nurse in her early 40s, often crossed paths with Lily. Na was known for being strict and rarely smiled. She was known for being demanding and found Lily's warm and easygoing nature irritating. One day, while Lily was talking to Whiskers, Na walked by and gave her a disapproving look. "You spend more time with that cat than doing your job," Na said sharply. Lily was surprised and tried to explain. "I just feel sorry for him, Na. He's all alone, waiting for his owner to get better." "Well, we're not here to pamper animals," Na replied coldly before walking away. Lily sighed, feeling Na's disapproval weigh on her, but she couldn't bring herself to ignore Whiskers. The cat's loyalty to his owner touched her deeply, and she knew she couldn't just leave him. Around this time, Lily met Edward Bennett, a patient in his early 70s. Edward owned a successful construction company, but despite his wealth, he had simple tastes. His salt and pepper hair and kind but tired blue eyes showed a life of both success and hardship. He was recovering from surgery that had affected his once strong health. Lily was assigned to take care of Edward during his hospital stay, and they quickly became friends. Edward, who was disappointed with his stepson Lucas's careless behavior and his wife Catherine's cold attitude, found comfort in Lily's real kindness. They would chat during her shifts, and Edward grew very fond of her. One day, while Lily was taking care of Edward's room, he brought up something that had been on his mind. "Lily, you remind me of someone I knew a long time ago," Edward said, sounding nostalgic. "You have a warmth that's rare these days." Lily blushed at the compliment. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I just try to treat everyone how I'd like to be treated." Edward nodded. "You know, Lily, I've been thinking a lot. My family isn't the easiest to deal with. But you're different. You're genuine." Lily wasn't sure what Edward was getting at, but she listened carefully. There was something in his voice that made her feel he had something important to say, something that might change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. As Lily left Edward's room that day, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than she knew. With Whiskers still waiting patiently for his owner, Lily's life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet predict. The suspense was growing. and she had no idea how much her life was going to shift. In the following weeks, Lily and Edward became even closer. Their conversations moved from everyday topics to more personal matters. Edward shared details about his complicated life, including his construction company that he had built from scratch and his growing disappointment with his wife Catherine and stepson Lucas. One afternoon, while Lily was changing the sheets on Edward's bed, he suddenly asked, "Have you ever thought about what you'd do with a large amount of money, like $20 million?" The question surprised Lily, and she paused, holding the fresh sheets. $20 million? Lily repeated with a half laugh. "I can't even imagine what that would be like. Why do you ask?" Edward looked at her seriously, his blue eyes focused on her face. "I've been thinking a lot about what I'll leave behind. I'm getting older, and I wonder if the people I leave everything to will appreciate it or just waste it." Lily wasn't sure how to respond. She could tell Edward was building up to something, but she didn't know what. "I'm sure your family cares about you, Mr. Bennett," she said carefully. Edward sighed deeply. "I wish that were true. My wife, Catherine, seems more interested in what my money can do for her than in me. And Lucas, my stepson, has never been responsible. He's reckless and expects everything to be handed to him. I've had to help him out more times than I can count." Lily nodded, unsure of where this was going. She felt sorry for Edward, who seemed like a man who had given a lot but received little in return. Edward made a decision. "Lily, I need your help," he said firmly. "There's an important business event coming up, and I need someone to pretend to be my daughter." Lily was surprised. "Your daughter? Why me?" "Because you're the only person I trust right now," Edward explained. "This event is crucial for a deal I'm working on. My business partners care a lot about family connections, and I don't have anyone reliable to stand in for me. Lucas is not an option, and Catherine only cares about her own image. I need someone genuine who can help me present the right image." Lily felt a mix of emotions, honored, confused, and a little scared. "I don't know, Mr. Bennett," she said slowly. "I wouldn't know how to pretend to be someone I'm not, especially at such an important event." Edward reached out and gently touched Lily's arm. "Don't worry about anything. I'll handle everything, the clothes, the details. All I need is for you to be there and show your kindness. I'll make sure you're paid for your time." Lily hesitated, realizing how big a request this was. It wasn't just the money. Though being paid to attend a fancy event was tempting, it was also the trust Edward was placing in her. "I'll think about it," she said with a small smile. As Lily left Edward's room, she felt both excited and nervous. What he was asking was unlike anything she had done before, and she was worried about getting in over her head. Meanwhile, at Edward's luxurious home, Catherine Bennett was growing more suspicious. She had noticed Edward becoming more distant and secretive. He seemed to be spending less time with her and more time with the young orderly from the hospital. Catherine, always sharp and calculating, started to worry about losing Edward's wealth. She knew the $20 million inheritance was her and Lucas's chance for a life of luxury, and she wasn't going to let anyone come between them and that money. That evening, she called Lucas into the grand parlor while she sipped expensive red wine. Lucas, who had just come home from another late night, slumped into a chair across from her. "We need to talk," Catherine said firmly. "Your stepfather is up to something, and it involves that girl from the hospital." Lucas rolled his eyes. "What's he doing now? Planning to give her a few bucks to keep her quiet?" Catherine shook her head. "It's something much bigger than that. I don't have all the details yet, but I plan to find out. When I do, we need to be ready to act. We can't let him change his will or give away what's rightfully ours." Lucas, now more interested, leaned forward. "What do you want me to do?" "Keep a close eye on him," Catherine said, "and make sure that girl stays away from him. We can't afford any mistakes." The $20 million is ours, Lucas, and we're not letting anyone take it from us. As the night went on, the tension in the Bennett household increased. Lily didn't know that her choice to help Edward would soon involve her in a dangerous mix of loyalty, betrayal, and greed. Lily spent several sleepless nights thinking about Edward's proposal. Posing as his daughter for an important event was scary, but she couldn't ignore the trust Edward had shown her. It wasn't just the promise of payment that made her consider it. It was the real connection she felt with him. He was lonely, and his family had let him down. If she could help him, even in this unusual way, she decided it was worth the risk. The next day, she went back to Edward's room, where he was anxiously waiting for her answer. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'll do it. I'll help you at the event." Edward's face brightened with relief and thanks. "Thank you, Lily. You don't know how much this means to me." As promised, Edward took care of everything. He arranged for a personal stylist to help Lily get ready for the event. She got a beautiful dress, elegant jewelry, and even a makeover at a fancy salon. For someone who was used to wearing scrubs and practical clothes, the change was overwhelming, but Lily felt excited too. On the night of the event, Edward's driver came to pick Lily up from her simple apartment. Grace, her grandmother, watched proudly as her granddaughter, looking elegant and graceful, got into the luxurious car. "Remember who you are, Lily," Grace called out as the car drove away. "Be true to yourself." Lily's grandmother, Grace, said as she watched Lily get into the fancy car. Lily held those words close to her heart as she was driven to the grand event. The venue, a stunning ballroom in downtown Seattle, was amazing. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from the ceiling, and the soft chatter of Seattle's elite filled the air as they mingled and networked. Edward was waiting for Lily near the entrance. When he saw her, he smiled warmly. "Lily, you look fantastic. I knew you'd fit right in." "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," Lily said, still feeling a bit out of place but comforted by Edward's confidence. As the evening went on, Lily began to feel more at ease. Edward introduced her as his daughter, and she played the part with a natural ease that surprised even herself. The guests seemed to like her, charmed by her genuine interest in their conversations. But as the night went on, Lily noticed something odd. Lucas had shown up at the event. Even though Edward had said he wasn't supposed to be there, he was hanging around the edges of the room, watching Lily and Edward closely. There was something unsettling about his gaze, making Lily feel uneasy. As Lily and Edward mingled, Lucas saw his chance. He approached Lily at the refreshment table with a sneer. "Well, if it isn't Daddy's little princess," he said mockingly. "Enjoying your big night out?" Lily was surprised by his hostility but kept her composure. "I'm just here to help Mr. Bennett," she said calmly. "Help him?" Lucas laughed harshly. "You're just a pawn in his game. Do you really think he cares about you? He's using you to make himself look good. Once he's done with you, he'll just throw you away like the rest of us." His words hurt, but Lily tried not to show it. "I'm not here for the money or status, Lucas. I'm here because I care about him, which you clearly don't understand." Lucas's eyes narrowed, and Lily thought he might get aggressive. Instead, he leaned in closer and spoke in a low, threatening tone. "You don't know what you're getting into, but don't worry, it's all going to fall apart soon enough." Before Lily could reply, Lucas turned and walked away, blending into the crowd. Her heart raced as she tried to understand his warning, feeling that something was seriously wrong. As the evening went on, Lily's unease grew. Edward noticed she was upset and asked if she was okay, but she didn't want to worry him and said she was fine. As the event was wrapping up, the atmosphere changed. There was a tense feeling in the air, and Lily noticed Catherine, who had arrived late, standing off to the side and watching her with a cold stare. It was clear Catherine was up to something, but Lily couldn't figure out what. Just as the night was coming to an end, Lucas appeared again, holding a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice echoing through the room, "I have a little surprise for you all." Lily's heart sank as she realized Lucas was about to carry out his threat. The room went silent, and everyone turned to listen as Lucas spoke. "Lily Adams," he said, pointing at her, "isn't who she claims to be. She's not Edward Bennett's daughter. She's a fraud and a gold digger using my stepfather for his money." The crowd gasped and whispered in shock. Lily felt her face go pale as she stood frozen, overwhelmed by Lucas's accusations. She looked at Edward, who was staring at Lucas in disbelief, clearly surprised by his stepson's betrayal. Before Lucas could say more, Olivia, Edward's loyal assistant, stepped forward. "That's enough, Lucas," she said firmly. "You're the one trying to manipulate your stepfather, and everyone knows it." The room fell silent again, with a thick sense of tension. Lucas looked taken aback for a moment. Then his face hardened. "You're all idiots," he said, before storming out of the room, leaving everyone in stunned silence. Lily was upset, but Olivia's support gave her the strength to stay strong. Edward came over to her, showing his unwavering support. "Don't worry, Lily," he whispered. "We'll get through this together." Even with the chaos, Edward and Lily's bond grew stronger, but Lily knew the trouble was far from over. Catherine and Lucas were still a threat, and their greed for the $20 million inheritance would make them even more dangerous. As the night ended, Lily wondered what would happen next but was determined to face whatever came. In the days after the event, things were tense in Edward Bennett's life. Lucas's accusations had stirred up trouble, not just among Edward's friends and family but also in his business world. Despite this, Edward was determined to protect Lily and stand up to the threats from his wife and stepson. Lily, though shaken, found comfort in Edward's support. She spent more time at the hospital, trying to focus on her work and push away the worry. But the feeling of danger never fully left her. One afternoon, as Lily was finishing her shift, Olivia came to her with a serious look. "Lily, you need to know something. Catherine and Lucas are still causing trouble. They're trying to pressure Edward into changing his will." Lily felt a wave of worry. "What are they planning?" "I don't have all the details," Olivia said, "but I know they're desperate. They want that $20 million, and they'll do anything to get it." Lily felt scared but knew she had to stick by Edward. "We have to stop them," she said firmly. That evening, Lily went to Edward's house to warn him. When she arrived, she found him in his study, looking tired but determined. "Edward, they're coming after you," she said directly. "You need to protect yourself." Edward nodded, looking worn out but resolute. "I know, Lily. I've already made some plans. The will is set, and you're named as my heir. But there's something more I need to do." "What is it?" Lily asked, her heart racing. "I'm divorcing Catherine," Edward said quietly. "She's shown her true colors, and I can't let her or Lucas have any claim on my estate. It's time to cut ties." Before Lily could respond, the study door flew open. Catherine stormed in, looking furious, with Lucas right behind her, also angry. "You think you can just cut us out like this?" Catherine shouted. "We're your family." Edward remained calm but firm. "You were never really my family. You only wanted my money. It ends now." Lucas tried to step forward, but Edward kept his distance. "It's over, Lucas. You've lost. The inheritance and my trust are gone." Catherine sneered. "You'll regret this, Edward. You'll end up alone, and no one will care." Lily, standing with Edward, spoke up. "You're wrong, Catherine. Edward has people who care about him for who he is, not for his money." Realizing they couldn't win, Catherine and Lucas left the study in anger, leaving Edward and Lily alone in the quiet room. In the weeks that followed, Edward's divorce was finalized, and Lucas was completely cut off from his life. Edward's health improved, and he began to rebuild his life, free from the negativity of his former family. One sunny afternoon, while they relaxed in his garden, Edward made a life-changing decision for Lily. "Lily, you've become like the daughter I never had. I want to make it official, if you're willing." Tears filled Lily's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Edward, I'd be honored." They became a new family, built on trust, loyalty, and love. With Grace and Irene there, and Whiskers happily lounging nearby, they found a peace they had longed for. The $20 million inheritance was no longer a source of stress but a symbol of their new life together. In the end, it wasn't the money that mattered but the strong bonds they had created.
When I first met Andrew, he was working for my father. That connection led us to fall in love, and eventually, we got married. After our wedding, Andrew and I decided I would stay home, allowing me to focus on my hobbies like sewing and knitting. I loved making scarves and gloves for him every winter, gradually improving my skills until he proudly compared my creations to store-bought items. His encouragement fueled my passion, and I dreamed of sharing this hobby with our future child, a thought that always brought smiles to our faces. Andrew and I have been married for 6 years now. Though we don't have children, we found happiness in our life together. Despite his demanding job, Andrew always made an effort to spend time with me on his days off, something that meant the world to me. However, there were moments when his long hours left me feeling isolated. 3 years ago, our peaceful life was upended when I suddenly collapsed at home due to dizziness. Andrew rushed me to the hospital, and I woke to overhear him discussing my condition with the doctor. It was serious, something I would have to manage for the rest of my life. While it wasn't immediately life-threatening, the possibility of future episodes meant long hospital stays were inevitable. Despite my anxiety, Andrew was there, reassuring me. He told me not to worry and promised to visit as often as he could. During one of those hospital stays, I found myself reflecting on the many scarves and gloves I had made for him over the years, now carelessly tossed aside. Then, one day, in what seemed like a thoughtless comment, Andrew remarked, "I married you because you're the boss's daughter." His words stung deeply. A cold realization washed over me. I needed to confront him about his true feelings and how we could move forward in our marriage. Though Andrew tried to comfort me with reassuring words, the wound from his earlier comment lingered. He continued to visit me, bringing my sewing tools to help pass the time. Teaching him how to sew became a sweet distraction, and we spent hours stitching together, talking about daily trivialities. It made the monotony of hospital life more bearable, and for a while, it felt like everything might still be okay. But after about a year, his visits became less frequent. What used to be daily check-ins dwindled to every few weeks. I assumed he was overwhelmed with work and poured my energy into sewing, working on a special scarf and gloves to give him during his next visit. Anticipating my discharge by the year's end, I put all my love and longing into each stitch. When he finally came back, I eagerly handed him the gloves I had made. But instead of gratitude, I was met with a cold, detached stare. "Are you still making these?" "It's annoying," he said bluntly, pushing the scarf, still untouched, back into my hands, along with divorce papers. His words cut deeper than any physical pain. Andrew explained that he could no longer take care of me and felt it was time for us to part ways. The divorce papers were already signed, signaling the end of our journey together. Although I had sensed a change in our relationship ever since his visits became sporadic, facing the reality was utterly heart-wrenching. I had always tried to convince myself that Andrew was simply overwhelmed with work, but deep down, I knew the truth. The Andrew I once knew, kind, attentive, and supportive, would never have let work stand in the way of being there for me. When he stopped visiting without any explanation, I knew something was wrong. When I finally asked him calmly why he wanted a divorce, it wasn't out of desperation to save our relationship. I had already come to terms with the fact that I might have become a burden to him. If the compassionate Andrew I had married truly wanted to leave, I was ready to let go. Accepting this was painful but necessary, as it was clear the life we had once dreamed of together was no longer possible. As his visits became increasingly rare, I grappled with the reality that the partnership he had once promised me had become a distant memory. When I finally gathered the courage to ask him why he had changed so drastically, his answer was shockingly blunt. "Isn't it obvious? Ever since I married you, it's been one problem after another. I'm so tired of those scarves and glows you make every year. Honestly, I only married you because your dad was my boss." His harsh laugh felt like a slap in the face. His words revealed a deep-seated resentment toward the simple joys I had cherished in our life together, joys that he now ridiculed as trivial and embarrassing. As he vented his frustrations, I noticed the luxurious, finely made scarf wrapped around his neck, one I hadn't made. It hit me then. Perhaps he had never appreciated any of the gifts I lovingly crafted for him. Maybe they had always been nothing more than an annoyance to him. The realization stung deeply. After I became ill and my father retired, it became painfully clear that Andrew no longer felt the need to keep up the facade of a caring husband. During the first year of my illness, he had visited me regularly, but now I understood it was likely more about preserving his image at work. He had gained a reputation among his colleagues as the dedicated husband, caring for his sick wife. This facade had benefited him professionally, and it seemed he had only kept it up to enhance his standing. When I confronted him about this, pointing out how his visits seemed more about maintaining his image than genuine concern for me, Andrew was momentarily caught off guard. Then, with a sheepish admission, he confirmed what I had suspected. My condition had indeed made things easier for him at work, bolstering his reputation. His candid acknowledgement shattered any remaining illusions I had. To Andrew, my worth had never been tied to our love or the life we had built. It had been tied to his career and image. I once believed we had built something meaningful, but the reality was that Andrew saw my illness as a tool to serve his own interests. This harsh truth became a turning point for me, highlighting the vast gap between the life we had promised each other and the one we were truly living. Throughout my illness, Andrew had capitalized on the sympathy and goodwill of others. He candidly admitted how mentioning my condition at work earned him extra praise for his supposed dedication and how easily he was granted breaks. If I worked late, everyone praised me for being so committed, and if I needed time off, all I had to say was "my wife is sick," he explained, without a hint of remorse. His tone was almost boastful as he added that my illness had paved the way for his upcoming promotion. He dismissed his colleagues as fools, easily manipulated by his story. As I listened, I no longer saw the man I had loved, but a stranger with a cruel smile, revealing his true nature. Resigned and fully aware of the extent of his deceit, I quietly accepted the reality of our situation. "Well, if my illness was useful to you, at least there's that. But we probably won't see each other again. Take care," I said calmly, handing him the divorce papers. He barely glanced at them before taking them and leaving without a second thought, marking the end of our marriage. After he left, the weight of it all came crashing down, and I broke down in tears, alone in the silence. Shortly after, I was discharged from the hospital and returned to my parents' home. When my father learned how Andrew had exploited my condition for his own gain, he was furious. "I never expected him to act like this," he exclaimed, shocked by Andrew's behavior. By that point, I had come to terms with the end of our marriage. I reassured my father, telling him I needed time to heal and wished to stay with them for a while. My parents were fully supportive, encouraging me to do whatever made me happy. At that moment, happiness meant being with family and finding comfort in their love and care before deciding what my next steps would be. I decided to visit our old house, but to my surprise, the front door lock was broken. Confused, we rang the doorbell, only to be greeted by a stranger who informed us he had purchased the house a few months ago and now lived there with his family. While my parents were outraged, I chose not to cause any trouble for the new residents and left quietly. Still unsettled, I called Andrew to confront him about the house. Without any remorse, he casually confirmed, "Yeah, I sold it while you were in the hospital. I kept the money as my compensation. It was my house originally." His words stung, yet I was no longer surprised by his selfishness. I had already braced myself for more of his disregard and was focused on moving forward with my life. His indifference as he mentioned selling our home left me sighing deeply. It was shocking to find out that he had sold it about a year ago. Around the same time, his visits became sporadic. The fact that he had made such a significant decision without even consulting me, especially since we were still technically married and hadn't finalized the division of our assets, was astounding. Although the divorce papers were signed, we had planned to meet the following week to settle these matters, but Andrew had preemptively acted on his own. When I confronted him over the phone, trying to maintain my composure, I said, "You didn't understand anything." His confused response was, "What do you mean?" I simply replied, "I'll explain next week," and hung up. Turning to my concerned parents, I managed a small smile and asked my father for a favor. I outlined my plans and requested his help in preparing everything. I've already prepared all the necessary documents. There's not much time before our meeting next week, but we'll manage, my father assured me, though his worried smile showed how much this situation weighed on him. As my father, he likely felt a mix of guilt for introducing me to Andrew and anger toward him for his actions. His determination to support me was clear, and I was deeply grateful. As the day of the meeting approached, I felt a sense of calm knowing I had my family by my side. I found myself unexpectedly smiling at the thought of Andrew's reaction to the preparations we had made. We decided to hold the meeting at my parents' house. My parents and I sat on one side, with Andrew facing us from across the room. Despite knowing the pain the divorce had caused, Andrew appeared utterly indifferent, even smirking at times. His demeanor was not just unapologetic but blatantly arrogant, which only strengthened my resolve. Sitting beside my parents, I felt the weight of the injustice he had done to me, but also a deep sense of empowerment, knowing my family stood with me as we prepared to face him together. As the discussion began, I maintained my calm, assuring Andrew, "I don't plan to ask for too much." He tried to appear generous, claiming that the money from selling the house should suffice. My father visibly tense, anger flashing across his face, but I gently touched his hand to calm him, silently signaling that we had the upper hand and didn't need to let emotions take over. "Before we proceed, there's something important we need to address," I said, taking a document from my father and holding it out for Andrew to see. "The house was indeed in your name, but the land it stands on belongs to my father, who holds the title," I explained calmly. Andrew's smirk faded slightly, replaced by a frown. "So what? The house was still mine. No one can argue with that. Do you think this gives you some way to get back at me?" He chuckled dismissively, failing to grasp the implications. "It's true, you legally sold the house," I acknowledged. "However, since the land is still owned by my father, this poses a significant issue for the family who purchased it," I continued, outlining the predicament. "You sold the house, yes, but as the landowner, my father could theoretically demand rent from the family currently living there. Wouldn't that cause them considerable trouble?" Andrew's smirk vanished as the gravity of the situation sank in. His arrogance quickly gave way to a look of uncertainty, and for the first time, he seemed to realize the consequences of his actions. I paused, allowing the weight of the situation to settle in. "We don't intend to take any drastic action, but we can't just give up our rights to the land without compensation. We plan to offer the family the chance to purchase the land. We won't force them out or charge monthly rent, but it could become complicated if they refuse to buy," I continued. "Originally, my father intended this land as a gift for us to build our life on, not for it to be sold off to strangers without consideration. If the family refuses to buy the land, they might even sue you, feeling misled into believing they owned everything. Imagine their frustration, thinking they had bought their dream home, only to discover unexpected expenses hanging over them." With the land ownership confirmed, we soon visited the family who had purchased the house to address the situation and seek a fair resolution. Our approach aimed not only to protect my family's interests but also to show compassion for the new homeowners, preventing further conflict or distress. When we explained the circumstances to them, they were understanding but firm. They made it clear that any legal complications stemming from the sale would fall squarely on Andrew. They even mentioned the possibility of suing him if we couldn't come to a satisfactory agreement. I watched Andrew's face pale as he grasped the enormity of what was at stake. In a shaky voice, he asked, "What should I do?" I responded with a slight smile. "The family could buy the land from us, which would settle everything smoothly. However, you'll need to cover the cost. Once they own both the house and the land, all the current issues will be resolved," I continued. "Since they were unaware of the land's full value when purchasing the house, they might demand compensation from you. That's up to them. Keep in mind, the land's value is substantial, potentially worth more than the house itself. Even if you sell all your assets, it might not cover the cost." I paused, watching him absorb the situation before presenting another option. Alternatively, you could buy back the house and the land, along with covering a relocation fee for the family. This would return both the house and the land to your possession, and you could attempt to resell them. But after paying the relocation fee, any profit would likely be minimal. I let the silence grow for a moment before adding, and regarding alimony, your actions have caused me significant emotional distress. I fully intend to seek compensation for the emotional damage you've caused, I stated, my voice unwavering. You've used me as a pawn to advance your career, and now that I can see it clearly, I'm disgusted by everything you've done. Pursuing damages for this emotional distress is the least I can do, even though the evidence may be limited and a victory uncertain. Discussing it is necessary, especially given the situation you're in now. My father, the retired, chimed in with a stern, authoritative tone. I still have many connections from my career. I've been in touch with former colleagues, and they've shared their opinions on your actions regarding my daughter. You're not only losing respect in the workplace, Andrew, people are looking down on you. He spoke with a cheerfully grim smile, and I saw the realization finally dawn on Andrew. The combination of potential legal, financial consequences, and the crumbling of his professional reputation cornered him, forcing him to confront the harsh realities he had created. The status he had built at work with me as a stepping stone was now collapsing around him. Sitting confidently across from Andrew, I clasped my hands together, smiling in a way he had never seen before, radiant, calm, and assured. Let's talk about what happens next, I began, my voice steady. Andrew, caught in the gravity of the situation, let out a strained laugh, his eyes brimming with tears. As the negotiations unfolded, it became clear that the advantage was entirely mine. He agreed to pay alimony and compensate for the land where our house once stood. We later met with the family who had purchased the house, explaining the arrangement and ensuring they were treated fairly under the new terms. In the end, the result was favorable for everyone, except Andrew. He found himself losing everything. The subtle rumors my father had sown throughout Andrew's company compounded his losses. His professional reputation eroded, halting any chance of a promotion. Isolated and overwhelmed, Andrew eventually resigned, an outcome my father shared with me later. There was a temptation to see this as karma. The gains Andrew had thought he secured through manipulation and exploitation turned out to be fleeting, crumbling under the weight of his actions. Now back at my parents' home, I found solace and purpose. I started teaching sewing classes, modestly attended by local women and children. The joy and fulfillment I derive from sharing my skills have brought me a deep sense of happiness. This unexpected turn in my life has shown me that even without the children I once dreamed of having with Andrew, I can still impart my passion and experience in ways that enrich both my life and those around me. More than anything, this journey has taught me about the resilience of the human spirit and the surprising paths that lead to true fulfillment. Hi there, I'm Jennifer, just your average straightforward person with quite a tale to share. It's a story of heartbreak, resilience, and unexpected strength. A few years ago, life threw me a curveball I never saw coming. My husband Frank and I were living what seemed like the perfect life. Our cozy suburban home, our dog Billy, and dreams of starting a family. But then, out of nowhere, our lives took a sharp turn. I experienced a miscarriage that hit us like a relentless blow, shaking us to our core and challenging our marriage. We suddenly found ourselves lost in a whirlwind of pain and confusion. Frank and I had always been a solid team, committed to facing life's challenges together. However, this loss casts a shadow over us, infiltrating every aspect of our relationship. Conversations turned into arguments, simple joys felt elusive, and the intimacy we once shared began to fade. Adding to the strain was my mother-in-law, Betty, who had been eager for grandchildren since the day we tied the knot. The pressure from her felt like a ticking clock, amplifying our already heavy hearts. Despite countless doctor visits and treatments, my fertility issues persisted. The emotional roller coaster of hope and despair was overwhelming, with each positive test leading to crushing heartbreak. I vividly recall the devastating conversations with Frank where our frustration and hope spilled out in equal measure. "It's not fair, Jennifer. We've tried so hard," he'd say, his voice thick with disappointment. "I know, Frank. I never wanted this," I would reply, feeling the weight of our shared dreams crumbling around us. Life seemed determined to challenge us, and with each passing year, the burden grew heavier. Friends and family offered their support, but the journey of trying to conceive remained daunting, a profound weight that loomed over us, growing more burdensome as time marched on. Yet through these trials, Frank and I discovered the depths of our strength and the resilience of our bond. Our path wasn't easy, but it was ours, filled with lessons about love, hardship, and the intricate journey of life. It didn't go unnoticed by friends and family that we were still childless. Their well-meaning inquiries about when we might welcome a little one often felt more like pressure than support. But Betty took it to another level entirely. Every family gathering with her turned into a relentless interrogation about our plans to start a family. It often felt as if she were pointing the finger at me, as though the absence of children rested solely on my shoulders, especially given my fertility struggles. "Jennifer, it's so lovely to see you. How have you been?" Betty would begin sweetly. "I've been good, Betty, thanks for asking," I would reply, bracing myself for what came next. "Any good news to share? How about a little one on the way?" "Betty, we've talked about this. We're still trying, but it's not that simple," I'd respond, trying to keep my frustration at bay. Trying to keep my tone light. "Oh dear, are you sure you're doing everything right? You've been married for quite some time now. Maybe it's time to see a specialist." "Yes, Betty, we've seen specialists. We're doing everything we can. It's just not happening as easily as you might think." "Well, maybe you should try some natural remedies. I've heard that herbal teas in certain positions can help. I really want a grandbaby." "Betty, this is a private matter. We're handling it the best we can," I'd insist, hoping to steer the conversation away. "Oh please, private? We're family. We should be able to discuss these things openly." "I understand that, Betty, but let's just enjoy our time together today without discussing this, okay?" "All right, dear, but tick-tock, time is wasting, and soon you won't be able to have kids." "I'll keep that in mind, Betty." It was always like this. I felt an immense weight of pressure and shame for not meeting her expectations of a perfect daughter-in-law who would bless her with grandchildren. Ironically, she never imposed such expectations on her own daughter, who wasn't even married yet and seemed to escape scrutiny. It was incredibly frustrating. This period in our lives was tremendously challenging. The pressure from Betty only continued to build, and it felt like she was constantly holding my fertility struggles against me. I could see the strain it was putting on both Frank and me. I suggested adoption several times, but Frank was adamant about having a biological child, which led to heated arguments between us. The tension from these discussions, coupled with external pressures, made everything even harder. I expressed to Frank how painful and unfair it felt to distinguish between biological and adopted children. As to me, all children deserve love equally. Yet he remained focused on having a biological child, a desire that weighed heavily on both our hearts. I couldn't shake the thought of the countless children out there longing for a family, which only deepened my sadness. As for Betty, her attitude escalated to overtly harsh territory. She relentlessly blamed me for her inability to have children, as if my fertility issues were something I could resolve with a little more effort. It created an unbearable situation where I was fighting to preserve my marriage while enduring constant judgment and reproach. It was an emotionally draining ordeal. Betty never hesitated to express her dissatisfaction. "Jennifer, you need to fix this and fast. You're the reason we don't have any grandchildren yet," she'd confront me. "Betty, I've been trying everything I can. It's not as simple as you think. I'm dealing with fertility issues," I'd reply, my patience wearing thin. "Well, you need to try harder. We can't let our family line end with you," she retorted, her fixation feeling almost dystopian, as if she expected me to fulfill some sort of Handmaid's Tale scenario. Overwhelmed, I decided to seek some insight from my sister-in-law, Amy, who always seemed more empathetic. "Amy, I don't understand why your mom is so fixated on me having a baby. It's not entirely under my control, and she's making my life miserable." I confided in Amy, hoping for clarity. "Jennifer, it's not just about grandkids," she hesitated, hinting at something deeper. After some coaxing, she revealed her troubling thoughts. "I overheard Mom talking to some family friends. She's worried that Frank might leave you for someone younger, someone who can have kids." "What? Frank would never do that. Why would you even think such a thing?" I was shocked. "I know you believe that, but remember, Frank was quite the ladies' man before. I didn't want to say anything because he's my brother, and I'm loyal to him." "You're lucky I'm even sharing this with you," Amy admitted. "Honestly, I think Mom might have a point." Yeah, Jennifer, time is ticking, she added, echoing the harsh reality looming over us. This revelation shook me deeply, intertwining my marital uncertainties with the invasive pressures from Betty and adding layers of complexity to an already strained relationship. Hearing about the possibility of Frank leaving me for someone younger left me staggered. Amy hinted at a younger coworker, an intern around 25 years old, with whom Frank seemed to enjoy chatting a bit too much. The thought that my husband could even consider leaving me, or worse, engaging with other women behind my back, was shattering. My heart felt like it was being torn apart by the potential betrayal. After grappling with my suspicions and the agony they caused, I reached a breaking point. The distance between Frank and me had widened into an unbridgeable chasm, and I knew it was time for a confrontation. One evening, sensing my withdrawal and standoffishness, Frank asked me about it. Overwhelmed by pain and frustration, I confronted him directly about his fidelity. Initially, Frank denied everything, as anyone might in such a shocking situation, but as the conversation wore on, he eventually confessed to his indiscretions. The revelation of his affair with a younger coworker unleashed a torrent of emotions within me. In a moment of intense anger and hurt, I slapped him, a stark reflection of the pain he had inflicted. Frank's reaction was predictably mixed with pleas and requests for forgiveness, but I could see right through it. Over the years, I had built a stable and prosperous life for myself, making wise financial decisions and advancing in my career. It dawned on me that Frank might have been holding on to our failing marriage, not just out of love or a desire for a child, but perhaps also to secure a financial safety net through potential child support payments in the event of a divorce. Feeling manipulated and used, I declared that I wanted a divorce. I was exhausted by the deceit and emotional turmoil. How could you, Frank? How could you betray me like this? I demanded, my voice shaking with disbelief. Jennifer, please just listen. I messed up. I know I did. I'm so sorry, he pleaded, desperation dripping from his words. Sorry doesn't cut it, Frank. You cheated on me with someone from your office. I shot back, my rage bubbling to the surface. Jennifer, you have to understand. I was feeling so inadequate, so unfulfilled. I thought having a child would make me feel like I was worth something, he tried to explain. Oh, so you thought cheating on your wife was the solution? Did you really believe that sleeping with someone else would magically make you a better person? My disbelief turned to scorn as I confronted him. In that moment, the truth of our situation became painfully clear. Frank's betrayal wasn't just a lapse in judgment, it was a deliberate choice that shattered the foundation of our marriage. No, of course not. I was foolish to think that way. I didn't know what else to do. Frank stammered, his desperation evident. You didn't know what to do, so you chose to hurt me instead. Do you even realize the pain you've caused? My voice was filled with disbelief and hurt. Jennifer, I can't lose you. Please let me make this right. I'll do anything, he begged, his voice cracking with emotion. Do you really think you can undo this with a few hollow promises? You need to grow up, Frank, and take responsibility for your actions, I replied sternly, my resolve hardening. As I sat in the lawyer's office signing the final divorce papers, a profound sense of relief washed over me. The weight of a broken marriage and the sting of Frank's betrayal were finally lifting, and I could breathe freely again. Despite Betty and Amy's attempts to convince me otherwise, their pleas couldn't mask the deceit they too had harbored. I knew what was right for me, and staying with a man who had been unfaithful was no longer an option. With the prenuptial agreement in place, the divorce proceedings were swift. I retained the house, my sanctuary where I could start anew. Frank, on the other hand, had to move back in with his mother, a situation he found far from ideal. The day the divorce was finalized, I left the lawyer's office feeling liberated from a toxic relationship. But as I drove home, a sudden wave of nausea overwhelmed me. I quickly pulled over, stumbled out of the car, and barely made it to the roadside before I threw up. The twisting in my stomach felt like the emotional toll of the divorce finally catching up with me. But as the nausea persisted over the following days, I realized this was only the beginning of my journey. I started to suspect there was more to this situation. The very next day, I was jolted awake by the incessant ringing of my doorbell. To my dismay, it was Frank, Betty, and Amy causing a commotion outside. They barged into my home uninvited, shouting about the prenuptial agreement and how it was unfair to leave Frank with so little, given my financial status. Betty wasted no time in cutting to the chase. Jennifer, we're here to collect some money as compensation for all the years Frank wasted with you, she declared brazenly. Have you lost your mind? Don't you realize the divorce is finalized? I retorted, incredulous at their audacity and the absurdity of their demands. Their presence in my home, making such outrageous claims, was the last thing I needed after everything that had transpired. I don't owe him anything, I insisted, my voice rising with frustration. Sure, but this sounds like some sort of side deal, right? Frank argued, trying to justify his demand. A side deal? I echoed, incredulous. Yes, he insisted. Jennifer, you've put me through a lot, and I need compensation. You're lucky we aren't taking this to court. Amy nodded in agreement beside him. Yeah, he's been through so much stress because of you. We think $150,000 should cover it. I was stunned by their audacity. A fire ignited within me as I faced them, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. Are you kidding me? Do you really think you deserve compensation for the years I spent trying to make our marriage work? If anything, I'm the one who deserves compensation. I knew Frank was practically broke and had no way to pay me anything, yet here they were, attempting to bully me into giving them money. Refusing to be intimidated, I declared, the whole point of a prenup is to protect my assets. You need to leave my house immediately. But then a plan began to form in my mind, one that would truly shock them. Wait just one moment. Before you go, I need to show you something. My heart pounded in anticipation as I hurried upstairs. When I returned, I held the pregnancy test in my trembling hand. Their eyes widened with shock and disbelief as they saw the positive result. As they passed the test around, I explained, I threw up last night and decided to take the test on a whim. The result was unexpected, to say the least. Later today, I have a hospital appointment to determine how far along I am. Frank, Betty, and Amy stood there, jaws practically on the floor, unable to comprehend the twist of fate that had just unfolded before them. You know what, Betty, Amy? Karma is a real piece of work, and I guess the universe decided it was time to bless me. I'm having a baby, but I'm no longer tied to any of you. The baby might be Frank's, but this baby is going to be all mine. I will change my mind, I declared firmly. Betty and Amy exchanged worried glances before Betty spoke up, her voice tentative. Jennifer, let's not be too hasty. We could work something out and discuss an arrangement. Frank finally found his voice, mumbling incoherent apologies, his eyes brimming with regret. But I wasn't interested in any of it. I had endured enough of their manipulation and toxicity. No more arrangements, no more excuses. Get off my property, all of you, before I call the police. I'm done with this toxic circus, I stated resolutely, my decision. I could feel their desperation to change my mind. But after years of their emotional pressure, I was unwavering. I had built an emotional barrier that wouldn't be easily breached. In our tense standoff, Betty broke the silence, her voice tinged with desperation. Jennifer, you have to understand that we care about this family. We want what's best for you and the baby. Frank may have made mistakes he knew about, by the way, but that's not important right now. He's the father, and he has a right to be in his child's life. Yeah, Jennifer, you know how long we've been waiting for this. We can make this work. Trust me, she continued, trying to persuade me. I sighed, struggling to keep my composure. I understand your concern, but what you fail to grasp is that Frank's actions caused this rift in our marriage. He cheated on me. Betty, you're a smart woman. I'm sure you don't even believe what you're saying. You three are just trying to get into my life to access my money. That's ridiculous. Yes, I agree you're taking this too far, Frank chimed in, his voice shaky. Jennifer, I messed up big time. I regret what I did, and I'm willing to make amends for the sake of our child. Can't we try to work this out? I looked at him, my eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. Frank, this isn't just about your infidelity. It's about years of emotional manipulation and pressure from your mother and sister. I've endured so much because of your family, and I can't go back to that toxic environment. Amy tried a different approach, her voice softer, attempting to sound conciliatory. Jennifer, we admit we made mistakes too. We were too pushy, and we're sorry for that. But we only wanted what was best for you, even if we went about it the wrong way. Please, for the sake of the family, reconsider. But I wasn't swayed. Sure, Amy, but it doesn't change what happened. I've made my decision. I want a fresh start for myself and my child, away from the constant pressure and guilt trips. So, thanks, but no thanks. Clearly frustrated, Betty raised her voice. You're being unreasonable, Jennifer. You can't just cut us out like this. I took a deep breath, my patience wearing thin. I can and I will. My priority now is the well-being of my child, I asserted firmly. Their attempts at reconciliation felt shallow, and their motives were transparent. In that moment, I knew I needed to stand strong, not just for myself, but for the future of my child, free from the turmoil and the strings attached by Frank and his family. I've decided not to expose my child to such a toxic environment. You all need to leave. I won't change my mind, I stated, my voice resolute. Amy's eyes filled with tears as her voice trembled. Jennifer, please don't do this. We love you and want to be a part of your life and your baby's life. As I had mentioned before, you can have a relationship with the baby, but I will not compromise my happiness and mental health for anyone. Please, I don't want to repeat myself. I struggled to maintain my calm. Frank, who had been quietly weeping throughout the conversation, finally spoke up, his voice cracking with emotion. Jennifer, please reconsider. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I'm sorry about those girls. They meant nothing. I looked at him, feeling a pang for the man I once loved. Frank, it's too late for us. But you can still be a good father to our child. Just remember that actions speak louder than words. With that, I turned and walked away, locking the door behind them. Betty, Amy, and Frank stood there, their faces a mix of sadness and regret. It was time to start a new chapter in my life, one where I could breathe freely without the weight of their expectations and demands. Life had indeed taken a turn for the better. I had my beautiful baby girl, the center of my universe. She was healthy and thriving, a source of immeasurable joy. Each day spent with her filled my heart with love and gratitude. I decided to allow supervised visits with Frank, Betty, and Amy, believing my daughter deserved to know her father and connect with her paternal family. However, I set clear boundaries, expecting them to be respected. Yet every visit seemed to come with the same chorus of pleas and accusations. They insisted I was being selfish for not reuniting with Frank. The pressure and guilt-tripping were relentless, wearing down my patience. One day, during another supervised visit, the familiar arguments erupted. Betty and Amy launched into their usual tirade about how I was tearing the family apart, claiming I was depriving my daughter of a complete family and that she deserved to have her parents together. I had had enough. After gently placing my baby girl in her crib, I turned to face them, my voice firm yet weary. I've been patient, I began, ready to reassert my boundaries and defend the peaceful life I had fought so hard to create for my daughter and myself. I've strived to maintain a civil relationship for the sake of our child, but the constant badgering and shouting are simply unacceptable. When Frank attempted to intervene, saying, "Jennifer, please can't we talk about this?" I firmly shook my head. No, Frank, this isn't up for debate. I've made my decision, and it's final. I won't tolerate this environment for our daughter. My resolve was clear. Betty and Amy exchanged frustrated glances but continued to argue, accusing me of being rigid and unreasonable. Taking a deep breath, I addressed them sternly. This is your last warning. If you can't respect my boundaries and continue to pressure me, you won't be allowed to see her anymore. I won't expose her to this toxic behavior. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Frank finally stepped in. Mom, Amy, please. We need to respect Jennifer's wishes. Our daughter deserves a peaceful and loving environment, he pleaded. Betty and Amy fell silent, their faces reflecting disappointment and resignation. It seemed they finally understood that their constant interference was only pushing them further away from their granddaughter. From that day forward, our visits became more peaceful. While they still harbored hopes for a reunion between Frank and me, they no longer pressed the issue. Although I could tell they were still remorseful, my focus remained elsewhere. I had more important things to prioritize: the well-being and happiness of my daughter, who continued to thrive. She was surrounded by love from people who genuinely cared about her well-being and mine. The change in dynamics allowed us to foster a calmer, more nurturing environment, free from previous tensions and conducive to her growth and happiness. Hello everyone, I'm Brenda. My sister-in-law Kathleen has been a tremendous support in my life, and it was she who encouraged me to share my story with you today. Kathleen and I have always been close, especially since we worked together before I met my wonderful husband, Larry, through her. I'm deeply grateful to Kathleen for playing Cupid because Larry and I have built a beautiful life together. However, while Kathleen and Larry are incredible individuals, my relationship with Larry's mother, Grace, has been quite the opposite. From the moment we met, Grace made her disdain for me clear, creating a strain in our relationship that even Larry struggled to ease. Despite his efforts, Grace's hostility never faded. Things escalated at our wedding when Grace wrongly accused me of ruining her dress, an incident that caused friction between Larry and me. Grace, being a single mother, had always clung tightly to Larry, making it difficult for him to create distance from her negativity. The situation reached a breaking point on our first anniversary. Kathleen, ever the protective sister-in-law, discreetly warned me about Grace's plan to publicly humiliate me. She intended to accuse me of stealing a precious family heirloom, a necklace. Despite my attempts to resolve things, Grace was set on causing harm, adding another layer of tension to our already fragile relationship. As our anniversary approached, I felt torn. I wanted to celebrate peacefully, but Larry insisted on including his mother. Grace's potential interference loomed over the celebration, threatening to overshadow what should have been a joyful milestone. I longed for a day filled with love and laughter, but Grace's scheming weighed heavily on my heart. Although Kathleen had confided in me, I hesitated to tell Larry. I believed he needed to see his mother's actions for himself. On the day of the anniversary, I stayed vigilant, watching Grace closely. Thankfully, the day passed without major incidents, but Grace eventually cornered me when I was refilling my drink. She accused me of trying to take Larry away from her. Her words were bizarre and seemed completely unrelated to our celebration. She claimed I was the reason Larry was distancing himself from her, her tone dripping with ominous threats of what she had in store for me. Kathleen, sensing the brewing storm, remained by my side, ready for whatever Grace might do. Not long after, Grace excused herself, saying she was going to put on her jewelry. When she returned, she acted distressed, claiming her necklace and earrings were missing. Kathleen and I exchanged knowing glances, realizing Grace was trying to execute her plan to frame me. Despite her convincing performance, we stayed calm, watching as she attempted to turn the guests against me. Amidst the questioning, Grace paused dramatically, insinuating that I had stolen her jewelry. I was the thief. What are you talking about, Mom? Larry interjected, clearly perplexed. You probably just misplaced them. It's not like we have strangers here. How could they have been stolen? But Grace pressed on. No, Larry, this isn't a case of misplaced jewelry. No one broke in. It has to be your wife. She's always admired my jewelry a little too keenly. The room fell silent, shock visible on everyone's faces as Grace pointed accusingly at me. Larry looked embarrassed by his mother's outburst, but his faith in me did not waver. Mom, that's unfair, he countered firmly. You're casting baseless accusations at Brenda. She would never do something like that. You must have misplaced it. Grace persisted, trying to convince Larry of her suspicions, recalling every moment I had complimented her jewelry. But throughout the ordeal, Larry's trust in me remained strong, a testament to the bond we shared. I stood there, stunned by Grace's accusations, especially on a day meant to celebrate our anniversary. Grace, I would never take your jewelry. I defended myself, shocked she could think I'd steal from her. When I complimented your necklace, it was just that, a compliment. It doesn't mean I wanted it for myself. Grace snapped back sharply. Larry, you're blind with love. Can't you see how manipulative your wife is? She's so greedy that she didn't even ask. She just took my jewelry because she wanted it for herself. This sparked a heated argument between Larry and Grace, much to the dismay of our guests, who watched in disbelief as the drama unfolded. It was humiliating to be accused of theft during what should have been a joyful celebration. Staying composed, I turned to Grace and spoke firmly. You have no right to accuse me of something so outrageous in my own home. To claim I would stoop to theft is beyond insulting. I respect myself far too much to engage in what you're describing. Grace, undeterred, fired back. Don't play the innocent, Brenda. I saw you last night, sneaking into my room. You came out acting suspiciously. And now it all makes perfect sense, Grace insisted, utterly convinced of her own narrative. Grace, you're making wild accusations without a shred of evidence. I countered firmly. You have no proof, and it's wrong to tarnish my reputation based on nothing. Who knows what you've done with your jewelry? You can't just blame me. If you think I'm lying, then let's check your room. I'm certain we'll find my jewelry there, Grace proposed, her voice filled with conviction. We have witnesses here. Let's see for ourselves. Larry, it's inappropriate and disrespectful to invade our privacy based on mere suspicions, I protested. We can't allow your mother to keep pushing this. If we give in now, everyone will doubt my integrity forever. The tension was thick, and it was clear something needed to be done to resolve the situation without compromising our dignity. As difficult as it was, I knew we had to clear the air and prove my innocence without escalating the conflict. Larry stood in the middle, torn between his loyalty to his mother and his trust in me. He understood Grace's frustration but also knew how serious her accusations were. With no proof to back her claims, it was a dangerous line to cross. Realizing I needed to clear my name, Larry reluctantly agreed to his mother's demand. As the group, led by Grace, marched toward our bedroom, the tension only grew. Grace, certain of her accusations, made a beeline for my closet. She rummaged through it and then triumphantly held up her jewelry box. Look, Larry, I found my jewelry in your wife's closet. See? She did steal my things. She's greedy and jealous. No, this can't be, Larry said, clearly conflicted but still supportive. I know my wife. She wouldn't steal from you. I don't understand how your jewelry ended up there. Brenda, you didn't take this, right? Of course not, Larry. You know I'm not a thief, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the chaos. Oh, really, Brenda? Grace sneered. Then explain how my other jewelry set ended up in your closet too. You can't wiggle your way out of this one. You should have just confessed and returned my things. Her anger was palpable as she leveled the accusation. I'm sorry, Larry, but this is too much. I need to call the police, Grace declared, pulling out her phone and beginning to dial. Her action sent waves of shock and whispers through the guests as the situation spiraled out of control. I remained composed, despite the crushing humiliation and the harsh whispers rippling through the room as we waited for the police. Grace continued her tirade, labeling me a gold digger and turning to Larry. This proves it, Larry. I told you Brenda was no good. You need to see the truth and divorce her. No one wants a thief in the family. The situation felt like a nightmare as I stood there, holding on to my dignity amid the false accusations. I knew this moment would test everything Larry and I had built together. As the reality of the police arriving loomed closer, Grace remained unwavering in her belief that I would soon be arrested. Larry, however, expressed doubt. Mom, I don't think calling the police was the right move. You might not like how this unfolds. What do you mean, Kathleen? Grace snapped, her confidence unshaken. I couldn't just stand by and let Brenda get away with this. People who commit crimes need to be held accountable without mercy, or they'll keep doing it. I think Kathleen is right, Mom, Larry interjected, trying to defuse the situation. Calling the police could backfire on you, but now that it's done, there's no turning back. How could this possibly turn out worse for me when Brenda is the one who committed the crime? Grace retorted, eager to see her version of justice unfold. At that moment, despite the gravity of the situation, I couldn't help but laugh. Kathleen smirked and shook her head, knowing something Grace didn't. The room grew tense as everyone stared at me, confused, wondering why I would be laughing while supposedly about to be arrested. Once I regained my composure, I turned to Grace. You know, Grace, it's fascinating how meticulously you plotted to frame me as a thief. What do you mean? You were the thief. You stole my jewelry. Grace shot back, her face flushed with indignation. Oh, come on, Mom. Have some decency, Larry said, his frustration evident. We all know Brenda didn't steal your jewelry. This has been a setup from the beginning. Kathleen's sudden declaration shocked everyone, including Grace, who for the first time appeared nervous. What are you talking about, Kathleen? I haven't done anything. If anyone's a thief, it's Brenda. Quit the act, Grace, Kathleen said firmly. You thought you could frame her, but I found out. I warned Brenda you'd try to pull something like this. Your scheme to trap her, it's over. I confronted her directly, and the entire atmosphere shifted as the truth began to unravel. Grace's plot wasn't just an attack on me. It was an assault on the trust and harmony of our family. Even before the party began, I'd sensed something was off, but her accusations during the heated exchange shocked everyone. How dare you suggest that? You're manipulating my child, making her say things without any proof, Grace fumed, her voice rising. Larry stood by me. Mom, we didn't have proof before, but now we do. The urgency to clear my name surged within me. Grace, flustered, demanded, What are you talking about, Brenda? What proof could you possibly have? Her panic became obvious as I calmly mentioned our home security system. Did you forget our house is equipped with cameras? I asked, watching as the color drained from her face. Grace's confidence began to crumble. Perhaps she assumed the cameras were only outside, unaware that her actions inside the house could also be recorded. Larry, catching on, added, "That's right, I almost forgot about the cameras too. We've got them in the hallways, clear views of every room from the outside. We can check the footage and see the truth." "Why do we need to check the cameras?" Grace's voice wavered, tinged with desperation. "I'm your mother, Larry. I'm telling you Brenda stole from me. We shouldn't need to prove anything else." "No, Mom," Larry responded firmly. "I thought you wanted to get to the bottom of this. I don't believe for a second that Brenda is a thief. If you're so sure, we should look at the footage together. I need to see for myself if what you're claiming is true. Otherwise, I can't believe it." Despite Grace's best efforts to stop us, I pulled at the footage on my phone. The room tense as everyone prepared to watch the events unfold, the truth about to be revealed. As the tension mounted, the police arrived. Briefed by the crowd, they quickly assessed the situation. Grace wasted no time approaching them, pointing directly at me. "Officers, you need to arrest my daughter-in-law, Brenda. She's a criminal. She stole my jewelry. We found it in her closet. Arrest her now." But I was ready. "I don't think so, Grace," I said, steeling myself for what was to come. I turned to the officers, interjecting firmly, "I have proof that my mother-in-law set me up and is making false claims against me." One officer asked, "Do you have solid evidence against her?" "Yes, I do," I replied confidently. "My home is equipped with security cameras, and here is the footage from yesterday." I handed my phone to the officers, and they began reviewing the video. Larry and the others watched closely as well. The footage clearly showed Grace taking her jewelry box from her room and entering mine while I was out. Moments later, she reappeared without the box, confirming she had deliberately planted it in my closet to frame me. The revelation stunned everyone, especially Larry, whose expression shifted to one of anger and disbelief. "Mom, how could you do this?" he demanded, his voice thick with frustration. "Brenda has been nothing but kind to you, and you stabbed her in the back like this. What is wrong with you?" Grace, now panicked and tearful under her son's piercing gaze, attempted to explain. "Larry, please let me explain." "No. Just no." Larry cut her off sharply. "I don't want to hear it, Mom. I'm done. I'm so done with how you tried to destroy my wife's life and reputation on our anniversary. I will never forgive you for that. I can't believe how low you stooped. I'm ashamed to have a mother like you, and I don't think I want any contact with you from now on." Larry's words hit Grace like a sledgehammer. Kathleen, who had warned about this possibility, nodded in agreement, her concerns now fully validated. The police, having reviewed the footage, realized the accusations against me were unfounded, confirming my innocence. One officer turned to me. "Ma'am, you have the right to file a formal complaint against your mother-in-law for making these false accusations." "Yes, I'm aware. Thank you," I replied, feeling the weight of the situation settle over me. "Would you like to proceed with pressing charges?" "It seems reasonable under the circumstances," the officer suggested. "We can take her into custody and clear this up." "Yes, I'd like to press charges," I confirmed. I glanced at Larry. "I'm sorry for the drama this has caused everyone tonight. Larry, are you okay with this?" "Brenda, what Mom did was wrong. You have my full support," Larry affirmed, his voice steady. As the officers approached Grace to place her in handcuffs, she resisted, her emotional state unraveling as she pleaded with Larry, Kathleen, and even me for forgiveness. "Brenda, please don't do this. I'm your mother-in-law. What will people think if they see me getting arrested?" Her desperate pleas fell on deaf ears. I remember how eager she had been earlier to see me in the same position. "You didn't care about public opinion when you called the police on me," I said, my voice calm and resolute. "Why should I care now? I'm justified in having you arrested after what you've done," I said firmly. The police warned Grace about resisting arrest, but her desperation had taken over. Her cries filled the room as the reality of her actions finally caught up to her. The family stood by, a mix of relief and sadness in their eyes, knowing this was a necessary step toward restoring peace and trust. "I'm sorry, Brenda. I shouldn't have done this. Look, we're family. We can solve this ourselves. There's no need to involve the police," Grace pleaded, her voice trembling with desperation. Her earlier words echoed in my mind, stark against her current plea for leniency. "Grace, you once said that criminals shouldn't be spared because they might become worse. Now, Seeing how you could easily become a menace to society, I feel it's my duty as a concerned citizen to ensure you face the consequences of your actions, I replied, mirroring her own logic back to her. Grace looked utterly shocked as I repeated her statement. She continued to sob and mumble apologies, but her words did little to sway anyone in the room. The guests murmured their disapproval, and the police officially moved to take her into custody. Larry and I accompanied the officers to the station to file a formal report, while Kathleen stayed behind to manage the aftermath of the evening's drama. As we reached the station, preparing to document everything officially, I paused, wanting to make sure Larry was still comfortable with the decision. "Larry, are you sure you're okay with this? If you're uncomfortable with filing the report, we can reconsider," I offered, giving him a chance to back out. "No, Brenda, we're not turning back on this. We need to file the report," Larry said firmly. "I failed to protect you from my mother's actions. She was about to ruin your life, and I can't overlook that. You know I never doubted you for a second, right?" "I know, Larry. It's not your fault. Your mom's choices are her own," I reassured him, understanding the emotional turmoil he was going through. Larry's love for his mother made the reality of her actions even more painful. Despite this, he stood by me, acknowledging that this step was necessary to protect our future and ensure that such behavior wouldn't happen again. As I finalized the report, Larry made a firm decision to keep Grace out of our lives permanently. To help heal the strain this had placed on our relationship, we had agreed to start couples counseling, strengthening our bond and learning to navigate our marriage dynamics with greater understanding. Despite the turmoil, Larry and I returned to our anniversary celebration. The food was ready, our friends and family were still gathered, and there was a renewed sense of support. We saw no reason to let one person's actions ruin our day. It was, after all, our anniversary, and we decided to continue the festivities, enjoying ourselves with those who truly cared. Even Kathleen had a wonderful time, sharing in the joy and laughter that filled the room. Meanwhile, Grace, my mother-in-law, faced the consequences of her actions in jail. Ultimately, she chose not to let the case go to trial and agreed to a settlement through my lawyer, which provided me with a substantial sum in compensation. Though she avoided a court case, I hope this experience would prompt her to reflect on her behavior. Since then, Larry, Kathleen, and I, along with several other family members, have cut ties with Grace completely. Some family members were hesitant to block her immediately, likely out of fear she could stir up more discord. However, distancing ourselves from her has brought peace. Larry and I have seen significant improvements in our marriage. The counseling has helped us rebuild with greater teamwork and understanding, and we are now looking forward to our next chapter together. We're expecting our first child. We've decided to keep our new family safe, ensuring Grace will have no involvement in our child's life. This decision has brought a new sense of stability and peace as we prepare for the future as a family.